And continuing our Monstrous Love series, we are talking about another film from 2024. What a year for horror films. Hits and misses, for sure. But we're talking about Your Monster.
Yeah. It was very cute. I liked it. That's my spoiler for
Yeah, I liked it too.
But what I'm going to talk about is the impacts of childhood neglect on adults. So like when you're neglected as a kid, this is what happens to you when you grow up. And Your Monster does an incredible job of exposing the long-term effects of childhood neglect, painting a hauntingly accurate picture of how unresolved trauma can shape a person. Like, I was watching it there, and I was like, oh my god, this is like spot on. As someone who was very very much that, and also fawned and was a super big people pleaser, and I'm finally like healed out of it. But like, it is a huge, like, I was like point for point, I was like, she's just doing every single thing. So it's reminiscent of the emotional release I felt while watching Talk to Me, and that it was like a raw portrayal of loss and grief that was so accurate. I was like, this is how trauma does. This one, Your Monster, does this perfectly. We see how neglect spirals into repressed emotions and how that shapes like her entire life. So the film hints at two types of neglect in Laura's past, both physical neglect in that her parents were absent, and emotional neglect as her emotional needs were ignored. So throughout flashbacks and the subtle references to her estranged mother, Gabe mentioned like the 3 times we see where the monster had to come out. Any mention of the mom specifically, we see that there's like a total absence of nurturing in her childhood. And this lack of nurturing and connection to like her formative people, in childhood influences how she interacts with the world. She becomes a people pleaser, burying her desires to avoid conflict, and fails to express her needs in both everyday life and her relationships. So this pattern of neglect follows Laura into adulthood. Her boyfriend treats her like a stepping stone of his own success, tossing her aside when she's no longer useful. Her friend does the same thing, offering just literally the bare minimum. Laura tolerates this treatment because she's never known love that didn't come with conditions. To her, expressing her needs feels like a surefire way to push people away and become too much to love. You cannot be inconvenient if you are neglected, or they'll just leave you alone forever, and that's awful. But it was represented so perfectly. So the ultimate blow comes when her boyfriend leaves her, as Gabe said, while she literally has cancer. Reinforcing her fear, like, it makes it even worse because it like reinforces that probably like long-lasting fear that like she's unworthy, It like made her even feel that way. Yeah. So it's like all that, like, I've thought this in my head, but now this is real because I'm literally having this experience right now. And so she doesn't even let herself feel mad about it because she's like, oh, this just confirmed how I already felt about myself.
Especially because he's like, you need like your needs. Like he's like, I can't give you your needs. And so that just like enforces that like she, like what she needs is too much. What she needs is crossing a line, and she's asking for too much by not even asking. She just expected the person she loved and spent like 6-7 years with to be there with her. So the audacity.
Yeah, it sucks. Yes. But the film doesn't stop there. It subtly explores the connection between emotional repression and physical health. So while Laura's cancer is, as I said, likely a mix of genetic and environmental factors, it's probably not just the trauma. Her unprocessed trauma plays a role. Repressed emotions keep the body in a constant state of stress, releasing cortisol, flooding your body with cortisol and wreaking havoc over time. Research has shown that trauma can increase the risk of autoimmune disorders, cancer, and other chronic illnesses. Neglect and emotional abuse can be just as damaging as physical abuse when it like manifests in the body. The difference is it's harder to identify and address because the scars often remain hidden until adulthood. You essentially can't stop it when, like, you can't mediate it sooner because you're not really seeing huge signs, especially like in femme presenting folks who are more likely to hide it. So these wounds frequently surface as behavioral issues, though not always, and are shaped by how children are socialized based on gender, race, and other factors. So essentially, like, you can't stop the neglect from happening if you can't see it and like intervene. And what makes neglect even more insidious is how deeply societal structures like capitalism exacerbate it. Many parents are forced into impossible situations, working grueling hours just to make ends meet, with no mandated maternity leave to offer a lifeline. In these cases, neglect isn't born of a lack of love, but of environmental pressures, which can be especially heartbreaking, because like it's not like for a lack of love. It's literally like, I had to work to feed you, and that is filled with love, but I could not physically be there. Capitalism necessitates a form of neglect, unfortunately.
There's also the people who are forced to have children who don't.
That too, and who did
So
not.
they might not have that love because it was never their intention.
Exactly. But that's not the case for Laura. It seems like her mother just didn't care. We don't know. It's implied though that like even when she was around, she was the worst. So essentially, even when she was physically present, she was not nurturing or kind. And she basically left Laura without the emotional support she desperately needed. To understand just how infuriating and traumatizing this kind of neglected, we can look at a data statistic that I actually found on Instagram, but then like researched and found out that it is real. Laura's anger is not only justified, it's overdue. I once saw a reel that stuck with me, and it said, if your parents meet just 30% of your emotional needs as a child, you'll grow up with a secure attachment style. The bar is on the floor. So credit goes to SOS with Dr. Taylor for sharing it, though it was a stitch and I could not find the original creator. So if anyone knows what that is, definitely let us know so we can credit them appropriately. Dr. Taylor referenced also the statistic from Donald Winnicott's 1950s theory, good enough parenting, which is supported by researchers like Edward Tronick, John Bowlby, and Mary Ainsworth. The idea is simple yet powerful, that parenting is hard. Achieving 30% gives over-anxious parents room to breathe. 30% is super achievable. It reassures them that they don't have to be perfect to raise securely attached children. But Laura's story highlights the other side of this coin. Her mother didn't even meet the baseline. There was no worry about how her actions impacted Laura, no effort to provide even the most basic emotional support, because she never experienced even that 30% of what she needed. Laura grew up with expecting and accepting the bare minimum from those she loved. And this isn't just a story about neglect, it's how deeply unmet needs shape our entire view of love, relationships, and worthiness. Laura deserves so much better than what she got. It's sad. An emotional neglect in particular leaves a lasting imprint, often leading to emotional dysregulation. This can make it incredibly hard for individuals to understand, manage, or express their feelings. So it like also eliminates our ability to be self-aware. Struggles with low self-esteem, difficulty forming emotional connections, and challenges with intimacy in adult relationships are all super common outcomes. But the impact doesn't stop there. Neglect in childhood significantly shapes how individuals see themselves. Adults who experience neglect can also often carry a diminished sense of self-worth, feeling unworthy or inadequate. And this can make it hard to trust others or form secure, healthy relationships. Attachment styles are also deeply affected, with many developing patterns of avoidance, fear of closeness, or difficulty establishing trust. Socially, the effects are profound. Setting boundaries, expressing needs, and seeking support can feel impossible. Instead, people who endure childhood neglect may fall into people-pleasing behaviors, constantly seeking validation to fill the emotional void that was left behind. In Your Monster, the titular monster becomes Laura's outlet for all of the emotions she's bottled up over the years. But without professional, familial, and relational support, Laura turns to the monster to finally validate her suppressed rage. It gives her the strength to call out unacceptable behaviors and demand accountability. But while the monster helps her process some of this pain, it's clear she never addresses the root cause, her relationship with her mother. Like, you see she's finally like talking back to the friend who didn't show up for her, the guy, the ex who sucks, but like we never see her mom. And she's the one who did the most damage. We don't know the story of her dad either. So it's like, you don't see her parents at all. And this lack of self-awareness leads to a dangerous cycle where her compounded rage spills out in destructive ways. As Gabe said, yes, her ex-boyfriend deserved every ounce of fury for his appalling behavior, but the sheer volume of anger, it's like when the soda bubbles over, you know, and the fact she literally murders him speaks to a deeper, unresolved pain. Generally, you don't get to like murder territory. Usually those who have been neglected or experienced trauma, like, they're not going to murder, they're going to be hurt by other people. And she definitely was. But because of like not resolving it at all, we just see this really explosive reaction that, because it's a movie, was very satisfying. So even though Lara's rage feels cathartic and maybe justified, it highlights the critical importance of confronting the core wound. Healing from emotional neglect requires self-awareness and a willingness to work through the root of the trauma, not just its symptoms. So without this, the cycle of pain continues, manifesting in ways that can harm both the individual and those around them. The last little thing I'm going to talk about is because a lot of people don't know what fawning is, and it's like really common and people should know about it more, but it's like when you think of like a danger response, you think fight, flight, freeze, and that's it. But there's another one that's called fawn. So essentially another component to Lara's behavior in Your Monster that I don't think is talked about enough in general is that Lara fawns a ton. Most people are familiar with, as I said, the typical ones, but the fourth one is often overlooked. So fawning is a trauma response where individuals cope by people pleasing, over compliance, and prioritizing other people's needs over their own well-being. It's common in femme presenting individuals and those with autism, and often develops as a survival mechanism in response to childhood neglect, abuse, or other adverse experiences. Fawning is not just a conscious choice, it's a deeply ingrained and automatic behavior rooted in the need for safety and validation. Throughout the film, Lara fawns almost constantly. She bends over backwards to avoid conflict, choosing harmony over her own needs time and time again. It takes immense pressure and heartbreak for her to finally confront how poorly she's been treated and admit to herself that that wasn't okay. Like there's like a long scene where he just says it over and over and over and over again. It wasn't okay. And then she finally says it back, and it's like this big like
release.
Yeah, like none of what I've experienced is okay. Like maybe he doesn't need to be murdered, but he definitely doesn't deserve my love. Because he
doesn't
clearly
deserve
never
any excuses either.
Yeah, exactly. So like her basically placating him and like allowing him to behave how he was behaving towards her, even after leaving her while she was her most vulnerable state, is very much a fawn response. So her lack of self-awareness is striking, but it's also understandable. Growing up, it wasn't safe for her to be self-aware. The origins of fawning lie in trauma and fear. For many, especially femme individuals, fawning can even be a matter of survival, because in a world where saying no to the wrong man can provoke violence, prioritizing others can seem like the safest option. Over time, this coping mechanism becomes second nature, driving people to suppress their emotions, ignore their needs, and focus entirely on keeping the peace. Lara's fawning behavior is how her monster became closeted in the first place. She buried her needs and emotions so deeply that they practically disappeared. She shrunk herself, as Gabe was saying, to fit the lives of those around her. When we finally see her express her anger, tell people off, it's exhilarating, but it's bittersweet too, because the tragedy lies in what happens after. Lara doesn't get a happy ending. Instead, she's left facing life in jail or a mental institution. And while her rage feels cathartic and honestly satisfying, he sucked, it's hard to imagine what could have been. Like if Lara were real as like an empathy thing, we would hope for something different. We'd want her to find freedom that she was denied, freedom from the toxic relationships, freedom to heal, and freedom to love herself. And it's heartbreaking, to be real, to think that she might never get that, even though she's a movie character. Like if we're bringing Lara into real life, she deserved more than that, she deserved a life where she could thrive. But the tension between justice and sorrow is part of what makes Your Monster so powerful. And while we cheer for Lara's moments of honesty and rage, there's an underlying sadness to the freedom she'll never have. It's a brilliant ending to the film, though. It just makes me a little sad, cause, like, from an empathy standpoint. I'm like, I want you to win, Lara. Like, you finally figured out how to be rage, I'm sorry, Lara. I want better for you.
Yeah, it made me think of when we covered Invisible Man, and like being like there was a lot of brilliance in that film. Like there was really ingenious camera angles and approach to abuse and like in toxic relationships in that way. It was the ending that really took us out of it, because like even though it's a horror movie and all of that, like that's not justice that it generally leads to the results that we want, leads to freedom and to finally recovering and healing. It leads to incarceration. It could lead to the death penalty. It could lead to you being harmed in a different way. So when we see like those revenge tales, and though this one isn't really explicitly that, because that's not what she wasn't like waiting to do that the whole time.
No.
It just kind of was like, this is just really clearly she blew up, you know.
Yeah.
It came to a tipping point and she's had enough. Because the last thing that she had and was holding on to just broke, right? Like how little she mattered to the people who mattered the most to her. Just absolutely destroyed her. And so yeah, I agree. It's just like very emotional, and like you feel for her, and even in that moment when she is, you know, saying it's not fair and she's screaming and she's letting that out, that's just the one part of it. Like the whole time you're like just wishing she told him off, and she never does. She never does, like, because her response is she just kills him. She doesn't say like, you were a piece of shit. You were actually a terrible person for X, Y, and Z, and for treating me the way you have all the way until today. Like never once changing or ever thinking of me as a person and treating me that way.
Like I guess she like kind of does that one time, but then they also like hook up, so it's like it kind of took away the weight of it a little bit, because then it's like he still wins. I don't know.
Well, still, especially because he knows that she got it wrong. He doesn't fix it. He doesn't like clarify it and like show her. He uses like her weakness for him to not like, it doesn't get through. And I will say, like, I think there's, for people who are people pleasers or people who've had traumatic or just, you know, these awful situations with people, and you really, there are parts of you that will always hold out hope for them coming around and apologizing genuinely and feeling bad and understanding and saying, you're right, I'm wrong, I messed up, I was horrible and I did this to you. Like you there's always a part of you that hopes for that, right? And I think healing is moving to a point where you don't need that, where you can still grow and you're not relying on this person to become a different person and to act in a way that is completely different from how they've ever acted. And so I think, if she could take more time, if her monster was just a little less like violent. I like, honestly, like him breaking his arm, I was like, heck yeah.
I feel like we could have left it there. I was like, that's consequenceless violence. You know, he didn't know that she was the one who did it, you know?
During a time, like, you know, like, it wasn't infidelity, but it was, you know, it was clear what was actually occurring. But like, and also like the way that he was holding that over even Jackie, like he was very much a villain in a lot of this. And so, I think it does just represent, like, there's at times where we hold out that we wish that if that conversation she had in the office, instead of him kissing her, if he instead was like, you know what, absolutely, you're right. That would have changed the whole story. But you're not going to get that. Instead, you're going to get him doing what he does. And manipulating her the way that he's very skilled at. So it is an infuriating film in some points. Because like I said, you're yelling, you're like, grow a backbone. I was so mad at her. But I get it. Like,
and you're like, it's so real though. That's why I'm like, I think it was necessary, but also it was really enraging. I think that was maybe, I don't know, part of the point. Because you're like, I am angry at her and also for her. I want better from both of you. And maybe not murder, but like, you know, happiness. And like, I think that's good advice what you said, Gabe, where like, you're not going to get the apology most of the time. So you need to heal without it. And that's how you can move past, and also like learn to like accept people for who they are and see them for who they actually are. Like that could be I don't need them in my life anymore, because clearly they don't care. They don't need to apologize to me. My absence is the consequence. So.
It's just thinking of like, what is envision a future where you don't need that, right? How can you keep going? Like, how can you know that you wake up in the morning, you feel okay, and you didn't get that? And so, and then work towards that, right? Because like we can't control other people. We can't change their mind as much as we'd like to. And we can absolutely be upset and angry and wish them a cruel and painful death. But we don't have to bring them that death. We can just leave. So I think like, yeah, the justice would have been her performing that song, and even though he yelled at her, like the curtain has to go back up and she's the one in costume, and so she performs that song and she does an amazing job, and the people from the New York Times or whatever write about her. That like, and not in this way, which is what they're going to be writing about. That she murdered him before in the mid performance. So like the ending I'm envisioning in my head, my alternate ending is she gets out, she's fine, she's actually a star. I'm a star.
She gets all like the credit that she finally deserves. But like, I get why they did the ending. Like, I'm not mad at the ending. I want to clarify that. Like, I thought it served like a really good it really showcases unresolved rage and trauma, and how that can really harm yourself and your relationships, even ones that, like, you know, they kind of deserve to be harmed, even if not murdered. It was very accurate. And entertaining. It was just sad.
And I think like that's what film is for. So we can live out those fantasies. So we can put like insert face over to his face. And we get our justice wherever the person is, like whatever apology you were waiting for. Maybe that's who we're seeing being murdered, and we can just maybe feel a little better because in this world that's not real, it happens.
Fantasy world.
Free of consequence. It fades to black before we ever see anything bad. Right? That's what horror is for. It's a cathartic release. We get to win. In a very like intense, like to the 10th, you know, degree. And I think that's what's beautiful about this. And
we're thankful they made a movie instead of murder.
always make a movie, don't murder, make a movie instead.
I've never done that laugh before. That was crazy. Did you hear that? It was like really high pitched and weird. It was fun.
So let us know what you think about your monster. Tell us about your monster, right? You know, how do you cope with those things? I will say, you know, Kat, I'm really thankful for your section because I'm definitely a fawner. Like, as you were saying those things, I was like, oh, there's definitely instances where that is my gut response. Like in awkward situations, uncomfortable, stressful, like some form of intimidation happening. I'm immediately like, oh no, it's totally fine. Don't worry. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you for telling me. That's so wonderful. I hope you have a good day. Do you want a hug? And then I leave. I turn around the next day. I'm like, why did I do that? Why wasn't I mad? Why wasn't I like angry? And I kick myself, you know? Like, there's still things I think back, like, what a ridiculous way to respond to something so horrific, you know? But it is a survival tactic, right? Like, to please, to earn your keep as well, especially when it comes to neglect. This is all is right there. It's gonna call my therapist, tell her all about it.
Definitely. I highly recommend, honestly, because same, I was like oh, this finally gives me an excuse to talk about this, because I've been sitting on my hands for this one for a long time. I've like wanted to talk to him about fawning for a long time. It's because like, it is very common, and it's honestly like at the detriment of the relationship you're into, because you're not telling them how you really feel. And I have ruined relationships genuinely, like where I'm like, oh, I really should have just been honest that it upset me instead of it festering inside of me, because it harms the relationship long term, because then they can't get better or heal. Like some people will apologize and some people aren't pieces of crap, and like will rise to the occasion, and then you're like stealing their ability to do that. My therapist would yell at me all the time for that. They're like, you're assuming that they wouldn't listen to you, and that's not fair, because you love them and you should let them rise to the occasion and prove that they do care about you and would respect your needs and boundaries. And I'm like, what do you mean?
I'm not worthy.
I know you're right, but also like I don't deserve it.
Also, like, shut up.
Yeah,
Okay, who
like,
asked you?
I'm like,
Yeah,
I hate that you said that, but also I love that you said that.
yeah. That's a
I
lot of
needed to
what
hear
therapy
that, but I
is.
wish you didn't.
I wish she went to therapy. I wish
Yeah.
she had a better friend. At least, like, I wish she had just
Mhm.
one person, not monster, person in her corner.
Yeah.
And she gets that in the end. Like, Jackie just definitely comes to her, but it's a little too late. So I wish she
Yeah.
had someone in her corner who could have just been like, girl,
Yeah.
let's talk this through. And I hope like that you have a person that you can rely on, or you go to therapy or work through it. It is tough. It is a tough thing. Like I said, the Scorpio and me,
Yeah.
we keep everything real cool, calm, and collected
Until
until
not.
it's not cool, calm, and collected anymore immediately. So
Yeah.
let it all out, and then it's done, and then we can move on. And then I'm like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Get over it. Yeah, I was mean for a minute. That's a Latina.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
They got
No.
overstimulated. I'm sorry.
This has happened 3 other times. You didn't know that, but it's happened 3 other
Yeah.
times, and I know that
Yeah.
because I've kept it in my brain.
Yeah. Haunts me. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, make the stories, dude. Make the stories like this that are so relatable and so fun.
Mhm.
And cast the people that you should cast. And yeah, I think it's a sleeper. I think people really slept on this because I mean,
Mhm.
it was an oversaturated year of horror and just like
Yeah.
interesting,
Makes sense, but
original,
yeah.
great films.
Yeah.
So I'm not totally, don't blame me if you hadn't seen it. This is your call to do that. Um,
Yeah.
and just again, let us know what you think. Let us know about your monster. Let us know if there's other films that you think fit into this category. If there's, films you want to see, that kind of thing. Remember to like and subscribe, give us some support.